Hi everyone, I'm Chris, this is the Vinyl Orchard, welcome back to another video. Today, let's talk Deep Purple. This is my favourite band, a band that I've loved and collected since about 1975, the year I started secondary school. And what I'm going to do today is just share with you 3 to 4 songs from each of their first 10 albums. So from 68 to 75, where they broke up for the first time, their classic period. All of their classic albums come from this time, I think. So this is a band, unlike Zeppelin or Sabbath or to some extent Uriah Heep, they didn't arrive with the right band in place, the right personnel. They had the essence of it, but some of the key members weren't in place. So the first 3 albums are, for me anyway, quite patchy and very 60s sounding. And in the lead singer, Rod Evans, they had a very baritone voice that suited the 60s, but certainly didn't suit the kind of direction of travel that bands were going in the rock world. And so the first album they brought out was Shades of Deep Purple. This is a UK first press of that particular album, and there are 3 songs that I recommend you listen to from here. The opening track, and if I'm honest, if you go to the Deep Purple catalogue and you play the first song on every single album, you probably have a really, really good best of in front of you, because usually the opening track is one of the best tracks on the album, if not the best one. In this case, I don't think it's the best one, although it's not far off. It's an instrumental called And the Address, and the second track is their hit Hush, which is a Joe South song which broke them in the US. And the third track I'd recommend is Mandrake Root, which starts off side 2, and that was quite often excuse me, if you go to live albums they did, so live in Stockholm for example, they quite often extended Mandrake Root into sort of 20-25 minutes, sometimes 30-minute kind of jam sessions, which they kind of overstayed their welcome, but in essence it's a pretty decent song. That's my 3 from Shades of Deep Purple. It came out in the US in a different looking cover. It looked a bit like this. This is the Canadian version. So the only difference is the Polydor distribution label in the top right hand corner. This is signed by Nick Simper, which is nice. Same track listing though. And in I think about 77 in the UK we had a Harvest Heritage series, and this was how Shades of Deep Purple looked at that time. Horrible cover and a fairly patchy album. The second album was slightly more consistent. It's called Book of Taliesin. This is a first press UK, as all of my Deep Purple albums that I'm gonna the UK versions anyway that I'm going to share with you today are. So there's a few songs on here that I think are worth picking out and listening to. There's a couple of covers. One of them is really decent. It's a Neil Diamond song called Kentucky Woman. That's a good song. That's worth listening to, as is Shield, which does very much feature that baritone kind of voice of Rod Evans, but it's a good song. And the other one is called Ring That Neck, which, like Mandrake Root, was a song that they extended live, and that will feature on albums like this for sure. And sometimes that would find itself being 25 to kind of 30 minutes long. A couple of cover variations. This is the US version of it on Tetragrammaton Records. UK was Parlophone. This is a single sleeve, but it has a different back cover. So that kind of thing is important when you're a Deep Purple collector. On to the third album, which was just simply called Deep Purple. It was a gatefold, although the inner gatefold is not particularly inspiring, but a decent album, decent enough anyway. It's the last album to feature their bass player Nick Simper and their lead singer Rod Evans. Chasing Shadows, first track on side 1 again, is one of the best songs on here. The track that closes side 1, The Painter, is also good. And a really good song called Why Didn't Rosemary, which is a really good song, great little solo. That's certainly worth listening to as well. So they're my 3 recommendations from the third Deep Purple album. As far as cover variations go, a couple of probably the most significant ones. This is I think a Swedish version of it, which is a close-up of that particular artwork. It's not a gatefold, and we have the track listing on the back. That's the Swedish one, and the Australian one goes for something completely different. It looks just like the inner of the gatefold of the UK. So that's their third album. Now, we did have the Concerto, which is a live album. I'm not including live albums today, and that included Roger Glover and Ian Gillan, who came into the band. They did a single as well called Hallelujah in between as well, which is okay. But the album they produced as a new group of people, often called Mark II Deep Purple, produced in their first album together, what is often seen as Deep Purple's classic album. And a lot of the time I do think this is their best album. It's just maybe edged out occasionally by the third album, by this particular version of the band, but I think this album is brilliant. Now there's a few recommendations. Of course, you'd have to go to track 1, side 1, Speed King. That would be certainly worth listening to. However, I do think it's worth going a little bit deeper and going to Flight of the Rat and Hard Loving Man, which are two tremendous songs that they didn't play live, I think hardly at all. In fact, those two songs, certainly Hard Loving Man, has reappeared in the set in the sort of 2000s, but up until that point wasn't. But those two songs are tremendous, and of course Child in Time. But Child in Time I think is better covered by the version that's on Made in Japan, as you know, quite a lot of Deep Purple songs. That's the best that those songs have ever been played. But certainly Speed King, Flight of the Rat, Hard Loving Man, can't go wrong with those three songs from that particular album. Cover variations wise, there's the German one with a kind of very white cover, and they brought out a 25th anniversary version of it, a double album with lots of kind of different tracks, different remixes, studio chat, that kind of thing. I think we were one of the first bands to really start that idea, and that's certainly worth getting. The vinyl version is quite expensive, but the CD version of that is really cheap to pick up. And then we've got what often people see as a dip, but I love this album, and the album is Fireball. This is, again, a UK first press with the lyric inner and so on. It's different to the US version of it, not visually, but certainly in terms of track listing. So my favourite tracks from Fireball are the opening song on side 1, of course, that's Fireball, which is a tremendous song that they didn't do live very often, although there's a good live version on a BBC live album. But the song Demon's Eye, which doesn't appear on the US version, is, I think, just brilliant, and that's really worth revisiting, as is a track called Fools, neither of which they played, Demon's Eye or Fools, they played live. I don't know if they must have played it live at some point, but they didn't when they were Mark II, I don't think, very often. Fools came back into the set in kind of the 2000s, but that's a tremendous song. So with the US version of it, you don't get Demon's Eye, you get Strange Kind of Woman, which is a tremendous song, but I think that's probably better live when you've got the vocal and guitar interplay, which is really interesting to see. They did an anniversary copy of that, again a double coloured, I think it's coloured vinyl, I can't remember now. It might not be, actually thinking about it. But this is, again, got those kind of studio outtakes, a couple of extra songs, all that kind of stuff. And again, that's worth listening to. And then we come to what many regard as their best album. I think it's, one day it's this one, the other day it's In Rock for me personally, but that's Machine Head. This is the album that brought us Smoke on the Water, their most famous song. I do think, though, Smoke on the Water is best covered on that. I think this features quite a lot of the songs on Machine Head, and this is the best those songs have ever sounded, I personally think. But on here, you get Pictures of Home, which is a song they didn't play live until much more recent years, which is a shame because it's an absolute classic. It starts off side 1, track 1, Highway Star, although the version on the live album is considerably better. But I think if you go to Pictures of Home, the studio version is Lazy. Yeah, I think the live version on the BBC album is really good and probably the definitive one, but Lazy is really good in the studio. That's a song that sounds very much and was very influenced by Stepping Out by John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. But the other song that I think is worthy of listening to is Space Trucking, because Space Trucking is a song that always got extended to sort of 20 plus minutes, sometimes 30 minutes long, and featured bits of Ring That Neck or Mandrake Root or Fools, or loads of different songs kind of appeared in the middle of Space Trucking. But I think as a nice concise rock song, Space Trucking is really good. There's the quadraphonic, UK quadraphonic version of it, which I'm sure sounds really different if you have the equipment. This is the Spanish version, which has got the back cover as the front cover and the front cover as the back cover, if you get what I mean. It had an anniversary. This came out in 1997, so the 25th anniversary of that album, again with some remixes. It didn't have much in the way of extra songs, different songs. It had the quadraphonic mixes. It didn't have much in terms of extra song, but except for one, When a Blind Man Cries, which was the B-side of the single Never Before, which is an absolute classic. But my three recommendations from here: Space Truckin', Lazy, and Pictures of Home. Recently they brought out a deluxe 5 CD version of it as well, 5 disc version of it, which is really good. Possibly a bit over the top, but when you're a collector, hey, you're going to have it, haven't you? And then we come to the last album that came out from Mark II, and this was a band that clearly weren't getting on. They recorded at different times in the studio, so a little bit patchier, but it does contain 3 absolutely monster Deep Purple songs. So this is the UK first press of it. It's a gatefold, lovely laminate sleeve, lots of press cuttings. I think it came with a lyric, if I remember rightly. It came with a lyric sheet, can't remember. So I think this is a really good album. I think it's got some great songs on it. Here's my recommendations. The first track on side 1, of course, and that's Woman from Tokyo, which is a great song, well-known song by them. It appeared on 24 Karat Purple, which was my first album I ever bought by them. Also on side 2, we've got Rat Back Blue, which is just brilliant. It's got a fantastic keyboard solo. Really, really ultra fast keyboard solo from John Lord, and a really bluesy song called Place in Lime, which is tremendous. As far as cover variants go, there's not many. The US was slightly different in that the baubles were slightly different size and the colours were different, so that's probably the only significant change there. No track list difference. This is a Taiwanese copy. Again, it's got a track list on the front, different colour here, and a completely different back. So that was the end of Mark II. We go into Mark III. Ian Gillan had left the band, so had Roger Glover. They wanted a new direction, or Richie Blackmore indeed wanted a new direction, and they wanted to employ someone who had a more soulful voice, a bit like the Paul Rodgers. And I think Paul Rodgers was a contender at one point. Imagine how he would have sounded with Deep Purple. But they hired a relatively unknown guy, David Coverdale, who obviously went on to very big things, and a guy called Glenn Hughes, who played with the 3-piece Trapeze. They brought him in on bass guitar and also vocals. Now, I wonder whether or not when Glenn Hughes joined the band, he thought he was going to be the vocalist initially. And I often felt in live performances that Glenn Hughes was constantly trying to compete and over-sing, to try and prove himself the better singer. He's a brilliant singer. He doesn't need to do that. And I think the beauty of the Mark III lineup was this kind of harmony vocal thing that you got, and occasionally one verse each thing you got, which was great. And that was to really good effect on their first album, Burn. Love this cover, always have. It was the second Deep Purple studio album I ever bought. The first one we haven't shown yet. So tremendous album, love this. First track on side 1 clearly is going to be a recommendation. That's the title track. But I think that's better on Made in Europe. That's the definitive version for me. So I'm going to choose 3 others. The first one recommendation is a song that's on any live album, so Made in Japan or Paris 75, is quite often extended with keyboard to start, solo to start, a drum solo, guitar solo, and I always felt it was a bit long. I'm not a fan of drum solos anyway, but the actual song You Fool No One, which is about 5 minutes long on here, opens up side 2, is a tremendous song in its own right. It's got a fantastic rhythm to it. The other song I'd recommend follows it. It's a song that's often seen as a throwaway, but I've always loved it. It's called What's Going On Here, which has got a lovely bit of kind of boogie-woogie piano from John Lord on it. And the other song that I've always loved is Sail Away. That's one of my favourite Deep Purple songs. It may even be top 5, actually. I think it's brilliant. So that's Burn. And if you listen to Fascinating Rhythms by George Gershwin, you'll see where the inspiration came for the riff in Burn. Cover variations don't really exist. There's an Argentinian version with a different name. Kemar, I don't know how you'd say that, but same track listing. This is the I don't know actually if this is the 25th anniversary. It's the first of the anniversary ones. It's a purple vinyl 2-disc thing with different remixes and so on. So that's a nice album to have. Number 520 of a limited run. Next, we've got the final album to feature Ritchie Blackmore. He didn't like the direction of travel. He referred to the stuff that Glenn Hughes did as shoeshine music, and he didn't want to be part of it. And you get the feeling, again, a bit like, you know, a few albums that he's been on, that he kind of rocked up, did what he needed to do, and then cleared off. And it does feel a bit like that. But I'm really fond of this next album, which is the final album for Mark III, Stormbringer. Signed by Ian Pace and John Lord. God bless him, passed away many years ago now, but such a talented man. Track 1, side 1, of course, is brilliant. That's Stormbringer, the title. I think it's better live. So the recommendations here, the first track I'd recommend closes the side 1. It's called Hold On, which is just marvellous. It's got a tremendous guitar solo in it. You could almost imagine Ritchie Blackmore rocking up to the studio, just recording the solo, putting his guitar down and leaving without saying a word. But it's just brilliant. So it just sounds so beautifully improvised. Lady Double Dealer, better live. That's decent. But the other two songs I'd recommend off here close the album. One is called The Gypsy, which does feature on albums like Paris 75. It's a great live song. Studio version is tremendous. So The Gypsy is my second recommendation after Hold On, and the other one closes the album. It's called Soldier of Fortune, which is just a beautiful acoustic number. Tremendous. Cover variations, well, the US one was bluer and different kind of band colours. You also got a Russian version, which is different again, with the Russian writing on it and so on. There's a quadraphonic version of it as well, with slightly different kind of, I don't know if it's lyrically different, I don't think so. I think Soldier of Fortune is slightly different. Again, haven't got the equipment to play it on, so I'm not really sure. And of course you get the anniversary. I don't think this was the 25th anniversary when it came out. It may have been a bit more than that. But you get some instrumental, you get some quad versions of it, you get some remixes. I think they were done by Glenn Hughes, the remixes. But that's certainly worth listening to as well. And then we've got the last album. The last album is before the breakup, and it's the first and the only album to feature Tommy Bolin. Now, Tommy Bolin was an American guitarist who made his name playing with Billy Cobham on the album Spectrum. He plays on one or two songs on that album to great effect, Quadrant 4 being one of them, for example. If you haven't heard that, the guitar solo in that is just incendiary. It's brilliant, and that's where he kind of got recommended to the band. Now, they did think about, and I think they interviewed, if you like, or rehearsed with Clem Clempson from Humble Pie, wherever he was from, and they also thought about Rory Gallagher and Jeff Beck, but Rory Gallagher wasn't a fit for the band. And can you imagine working with Jeff Beck when you think that Ritchie Blackmore's awkward? Blimey. Yeah, hugely talented, but I don't know if he would have fitted this band. Anyway, they went with Tommy Bolin. He'd been, as I said, with Billy Cobham. He'd also been with the James Gang. And there are tracks on this album, which is Come Taste the Band, the first studio album I ever owned by Deep Purple, strangely enough. There's a few tracks on here that sound like the James Gang. So if you listen to Love Child and then you play the album Miami, I think it's Miami, or it might be the first album, Bang, possibly. Anyway, the song is called The Devil Is Singing Our Song. It's the same riff. So 3 recommendations from here. Of course, track 1, side 1, Coming Home. Brilliant song, love it. It's a good rocker. It doesn't feature Glenn Hughes on bass. It has Tommy Bolin playing bass on it because I think he was off his face on drugs and they'd sent him home at that point. And they needed a kind of a good upbeat song to open the album. Coming Home was that. Great song, I loved it. The other song I'd recommend from here is Drifter, which opens up side 2. There's a nice version on this CD, in fact, of that, which is called Days May Come and Days May Go, which is a line from Drifter, but a nice version on that particular CD. So Coming Home, Drifter. And the song that closes the album, which I think is a top 10 Deep Purple song. It's an absolute classic, because this doesn't really sound like a Deep Purple album. I like it. It's a good album, and I think it still stands up today, if I'm really honest. But You Keep On Moving, that closes the album, is just It's brilliant. Starts with a beautiful bass line from Glenn Hughes and a great guitar solo. It's a great band song, and I absolutely love that. Cover variations are minimal, except for the Czechoslovakian version, which is very, very different. And of course, there was an anniversary. This one came out quite late. I think it's ended up being something like the 35th anniversary version of it. You've got loads of remixes. I think they were done by Kevin Shirley. And a couple of, do you get any new songs on it? Don't know if you do. Don't think you do, actually. Just remixes. But yeah, that's half decent version of it. So there you go. There's my recommendations for Deep Purple. If you wanted to explore the kind of Mark 1, 2, 3 or Mark 1 and 2 in a bit more detail, then things like the BBC sessions could be worth listening to. As could the CDs that came out of the first 3 albums that came out in 2000, which I've got some nice kind of BBC versions on it. And if you wanted that all together, there's a little box called Hard Road, which certainly is worth it. Maybe I'll do something on the live albums as well, some recommendations. But anyway, that's your lot for today. That's Deep Purple, my favourite songs from their first 10 albums. I'll be back sometime soon with another video, no doubt. Cheers all. See ya.